Hi, I'm Julian Crevier from North Point Partners, and I'm delighted to have my friend Clay Scroggins here with me today. Clay, how you doing?
Doing great, Julian.
So today we're talking about this idea of cultural shift has happened. Everybody's thinking different. They're doing church different, and communication is also being impacted. So churches are either jumping in digitally, full on, they're thinking digital, or maybe they're in a traditional sense. But the reality is you can't do church the same. You have to think, how do we do it from a digital and a physical place, which is changing the way churches are operating and changing the way churches and pastors are communicating. So if you focus on working with just one, you have the potential to alienate your audience. And so today I wanted to talk to you, Clay, and hear about what are we learning about how do we communicate effectively, recognizing that, hey, there's a new digital world and a physical world, and how can we leverage what we're learning in the digital world context and bring it into where we are today in kind of a hybrid communication context?
Well, I think the way you set that up is great because a lot of times we try to make it an either or, that I'm either going to communicate online or I'm going to communicate to the audience that's in front of me. But we don't live our lives that way. We live our lives, we shop on Amazon and we go by the grocery store. Like we're doing both of them all at the same time. So I think understanding that both of these new ways, well, one of them's not new, but this new way we have to reach people, to help people grow, to connect with people, they really can, the live environment and this digital experience really can fuel each other, I think, when we do them well. But yeah, what does that mean for communication and for preaching? We're working it out. Remains to be seen.
And everybody's trying to figure it out.
Yeah, everybody's figuring it out.
Now it's a digital and a physical. We're operating in this new hybrid world. What are three principles that you've learned in this process?
Yeah, I don't know if I have three principles necessarily. I hope that we'll find some principles in the middle of this as we talk about it. But as I was thinking about this conversation today, I tried to think about it just in three different categories that you've got. I think we need to think about our audience, both the live audience and the digital audience. I say live, they're live on the other side of the camera as well, but the in-person, in the room audience, and also the audience that's on the other side of the camera. So I'd love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about just some practical tactics, some in the weeds things that I think we got to be thinking through as we're actually practicing this. This would be for the communication nerds out there that just love geeking out on how actually the communication happens. And then the third big bucket is just the talk that we're building, the outline, the structure, the words that start on the page, and how do we form those in a way that honors the people that are in the room, but also serves the people that are on the other side of the camera as well. I think the principle of who we're trying to reach hasn't really changed. That we've tried to be really laser focused to define who is our in the business world, they would call it an ideal customer profile. Who's your target? Who's the demographic that you're really going after? So we put a name on this person. It's a person that we think of. His name is Successful Steve. He lives around Buckhead. He cares a lot about appearance. We fought a lot over that word successful because he does have the appearance of success, but he doesn't necessarily feel like it. He really wants to put off the vibe of
Probably
success.
Like a lot of us.
I mean, honestly, it is a lot like me.
Well, exactly. Every man, like the battle of not trying to pose.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so there's a lot of inauthenticity about this person. He's here because he wants to be a better person, but also he's here because he thinks it'll make his wife happy. But he's got some low grade anger that's pretty persistent. That he doesn't know what to do with. And he's got 2 kids, and he's probably a little dissatisfied with his job. He's not loving his job, but he does pretty well with it, and so he feels like he's got to stay with it. So when we were thinking about that person, one of the things that's been helpful is that person is in the room and that person is watching online.
Yeah.
That person, there's really not a big difference.
They're tuned in digitally, but
exactly.
But they've got kids, so they're like,
so they're
I want to
probably
get these
here.
kids connected, whether they believe or not. It's like, I'd love to get them connected to something good.
So we're hoping that person would be here in the building because they're getting their kids involved. But there's a good chance that their kids playing travel sports and they had something going on, and so they happen to be watching online this weekend. Or they're driving back from some weekend away and they got the phone sitting on the dashboard and they're watching with us on Sunday morning.
They went to the lake.
They went to the lake and they're on their way back. Yeah. So we really, that's been the principle, is that that person is really not any different. So I think that's really important. Sometimes we think, oh, I've got the committed Christians in the room and I've got the ones that are wayward watching online, or the empty nesters that are watching online, or the young and single that are watching online. And there are some trends that we've seen as far as when we survey the people that are watching online, who are they? There are some things that they trend toward more than the audience in the room. But for the most part, it's the same kind of person with the same basic needs, the same issues. Another principle is when we think about what do we want for the audience, we want that person to take a step, some kind of step in their faith. I mean, our mission statement to inspire people to follow Jesus, that happens by taking a step. It happens by some kind of movement. And we want that for that person sitting in the audience and that person that is sitting on their couch or in their car as well. So I think that levels the playing field a little bit and helps us realize, okay, we're talking to the same person, and what we want for that person is really the same thing. And so let's value that person. Let's not shame them for being online. Let's not try to put any guilt on them for watching online, but let's love them and try to help lead them in the same way that we would do the person in the room.
So the first principle in your mind is thinking, defining the audience, and helps us figure out how do we communicate to them.
That's right.
And then recognizing in digital and physical context, are they looking for different things? Is it still the same needs? To figure out how your message changes, or does it remain the same?
I think so. And I think also recognizing that the way we're going to communicate to Steve, we don't just have to use the sermon. It's interesting. Sometimes people feel like that they would prefer to opt in to communication in some other ways during the week, whereas the Sunday experience feels like something that you're forcing on them. That's been an interesting learning, that people will get frustrated about things we talk about on Sunday, but they rarely get frustrated about things that we talk about during the week if we give them the opportunity to opt in. So I think realizing too that we don't just have to communicate to that guy or his wife on a Sunday. There's 6 other days of the week that we can communicate to him. So an example of that would be just last week, the George Floyd verdict, or the Derek Chauvin verdict came out in the death of George Floyd. And our church is about 30 to 40% Black. And so I just know with Black friends of mine, there was a real emotional connection to which way this trial went. And not just to our Black friends, but there's plenty of white friends that felt the same way, but certainly it felt different to be a person of color. So, in those moments, we're trying to learn that, hey, we don't have to wait until Sunday to talk about this. And instead, we decided, okay, as soon as we heard that the verdict was coming out, I shot just a little thing on my phone that we put on our Instagram that ended up, a lot of people in our church were able to see it, that just said, hey, if that's you today and you're feeling like there's a lot of anxiety, worry, stress, concern, fear over which way this goes, we just wanted to let you know we love you and we're praying for you. There's probably a lot of police officers too, a lot of people that have police officers in their family that are probably feeling the same way, that are probably feeling real connected to this verdict one way or the other. Everything was just emotionally charged that day. I think a lot of that is because of where we're located, where our church is. And so learning that, hey, we don't have to wait until Sunday to communicate that we can say that now in a real honest and authentic way. I think that's been really helpful too, to know that Steve's not just waiting on Sunday to hear something, but there are things that they can opt into during the week.
That's great. I think about this idea of like our desire is to communicate to them, and we have different channels of communication. One of those is Sunday.
Yeah, that's right.
And so why would we only begin to think about that as our only channel of communication?
That's a great point. A couple of years ago, the little hand vacuum that we use in our kitchen broke.
Those break all the time.
They break all the time. And for us, when it breaks, it like shuts the kitchen down. Like we can't sweep like we want to sweep, or we got little kids. So there's always like Lucky Charms spilling on the floor or whatever. And so I'm on Black & Decker's website to try to figure out how to fix this thing. And I searched like service, whatever. And on their website, it had like, oh, there's a service center that's 20 miles away, but it was like 50 minutes away in Atlanta traffic. And it was only open like Monday to Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Well, I can't do that. Like, how am I going to take, and it's a little vacuum. So there's that little chat thing pops up, and this lady, Elizabeth, she pops on. She's like, "Hey, anything I can do to help you today?" I'm like, "Actually, yes. Is there any other way to get this thing fixed? I don't want to drive to 50 minutes away to go get this thing fixed." And she said, "How long have you had it?" I tell her, and she's like, "What seems to be the problem?" I tell her, and she's like, "Why don't we just send you a new one?" I was like, "I love that idea. That sounds fantastic." And so she says, "Give me your address." And she mails me a new one.
I'm a fan of Elizabeth.
I know, me too. I thought that's fantastic. But what I learned that day is I was sitting there thinking about it, and I was like, sometimes we make people do that, where we say, "Hey, if you need help in your life, we would love to help you."
Like, I totally lost it with my daughter, and I don't want to wait till Sunday.
Exactly. Or my wife and I are in a fight, or I'm feeling anxious and I don't know what to do with it. Well, here's some good news. Sunday at 9 a.m., if you'll drive across town to 3336 Peachtree Road, come inside our building, make sure to put some clothes on, and we would love to be able to talk with you and help you out. That's not the way the world is moving. The world is actually moving away from that, where people expect, the audience, Steve expects on-demand, 24/7 help, not when he's interested in it, but when he feels like he needs it. He's at the moment of need. And so the intersection of, I'm at a place where I need help, and the church God has something to say, believers have an opportunity to help lead others. When those two things intersect, I think that's when we're at our best.
So know your audience.
Know your audience, yeah, and communicate with them on as much as you can on their terms, on their level, and not making them come to ours. Howard Hendricks, the famous professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, he used to say, "You got to remember that Jesus said, 'Feed my sheep.' He didn't say, 'Feed my giraffes.'" But his point was,
what does that even mean?
His point was, don't put things on the upper shelf for people. Like, put them on the shelf where they can get it. Like, know who you're talking to, put it on that person's shelf. And I would say, and put it in a place where they can actually get it as well. Don't just make them come to us, but really do everything we can to go to them, which I know we've learned so much from Chick-fil-A. They've got that line that, in the days of old, it was all about getting people to come to us to get the chicken, but the game is changing. The restaurant world is changing. It's all about getting the chicken and taking it to them. And I think we got to figure out the same thing about our audience as well.
So first one idea that you're learning is know your audience.
Yeah, know your audience and know who they are and how to communicate best with them.
Know who they are, how to communicate best with them.
Yeah.
Secondly,
yeah, as we think about just some tactics, some this is more in the weeds. This is for the preaching nerds out there that really think about this kind of stuff. But I think we've got to learn how to get into the camera. That's something that I've really, as I've tried to watch and observe people that I really think are great communicators, they just really have a way of getting in there, which means I think oftentimes you have to bring more energy than you think you have to bring. If the camera adds 10 pounds, it probably also takes off 20% of your energy as well. You've got to really, you said it last night. We were sitting there last night listening to one of the sessions, and you leaned over and said, "Oh, this guy's captivating." Like, there was a way about this person that we heard communicate that was captivating. I think learning how to get into the camera, to stop that person, to get their attention. I think learning how to do that, it's very tactical. It is in the weeds, but it's really important.
But you mean like you connect, like reach through the camera, connect.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think we do that, we try to do that a lot topically through the things we talk about, but there's some mechanics of speaking that I think we can all learn from, people that are on the news, people that are, every television show right now that's a live event or whatever, somebody's doing that.
I was talking with Louis Lavoie last night, and we were talking how one of the greatest films of all time, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, he did this thing. I don't know if you remember that. He's talking, and then he turns to the camera and says, just starts talking to the camera.
Yeah.
And you remember those moments.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you feel like he's talking to me.
Yeah.
And then in The Office.
I was just going to say, Jim from The Office. He's famous for that. He's just like the little cut to the camera.
He does this little look thing.
Yep.
And it just draws you in. And so, what could that look like? How would you apply that in so let's say you have an audience and you're communicating to your audience. How do you recognize that we got a huge digital audience on the other side of the camera? How do you do that?
Well, I think you got to think about both. I think there's times when you connect with people and really try to make eye contact, but there's also times when you turn and say, "Hey, let me say this real clearly." We have the jib, they're the boom camera that people hate, but if used correctly, it really provides a really interesting opportunity to interact with people that are watching. So in Siri, we were learning this right before COVID, but we were trying to do this in series where I would have a sermon. I'd go, hey, on these 3 moments, I put it in the outline. I want to turn as the jibs coming in. I want to turn and I want to talk directly to people right here. I learned it from, one of the people that I like to watch who does this really well is Hassan Minhaj on Netflix. He's not the cleanest of comedians, but he's a writer for The Daily Show and does a show called The Patriot, where it's really a news show that he does. But his presentation, the way he presents his content is his stand-up act is pretty remarkable, but his show is also remarkable in the way it's shot, the way he looks into the camera, the way he has moments where he connects real deeply with people that are watching, and there's a live audience there, and then also the people that are behind the camera. So he's somebody that I think's worth learning from because of the way he's learned to do that.
Have you ever given expectations to the audience of like, so I'm excited to be here with you, but also on the other side of these cameras are thousands of people. Yeah. And so at a time, once in a while, like just the expectation is a big deal. So I'm going to turn to them and I'm not talking to you, but I also want to include them in. Yep. So if it feels weird, it's just weird, but they're out there, you know, yep. Work with, let's do this together.
I think that's great because I think letting them know, hey, we're a part of something bigger. You know, the world's kind of moving in 2 ways where it's moving local and globally all at the same time. The fact that you can communicate to people all over the world now, which is really amazing. The fact that, you know, the most wealthy person in the world uses an iPhone and so do you. There's some things that connect us in a way, but then also the world wants to be super local. I mean, you go to your local Target now, and they've got like high school paraphernalia from the local school, which is, I think it's Target's way of going like, hey, we realize you live in this community and we want to help you be for this community. And I think letting people know we're here in this room in this moment right now, but we're also a part of something bigger that we've got. And even at Buckhead Church, where, you know, the majority of people that are watching online watch North Point. I mean, it's about 10x of what watches at Buckhead. But even still, I mean, we've got a family that the dad was deployed. They were not deployed, but he was restationed. He's in the military. They live in Japan now. And they watch every week from Japan. So, I mean, I know we have people all over the world that watch. So I think you're right. To tell people that is actually bringing them in on how big the world is. And
yeah, I think it'd be interesting. Like if let's say you recorded a message and then like you record it digitally or for digital and physical, and you were watching the message digitally. And then like, as you were getting ready to a main point, you dropped in live to like you in your kitchen being like, okay, right here, this is the point. I'm about to say the thing that I was wrestling through with my little daughter, and here's where I finally got to share it. Like, don't you think that'd be like intriguing? Well, I don't know where that's happening.
It's like a Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell moment where he's like, time out. Can I talk to you for a second about this? Like,
but it's just the idea of recognizing like this thing happened, but I'm engaging you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've got to play with things like that we can't be, you know, I mean, Andy's great line that you marry the mission, but you date the model. I think that's an example of the model, that the model of preaching has got to continue to change is we think tactically about just the way communication works when we're talking to a camera, but we're also in the middle of a conversation in person.
What other tactics you recommend or have you seen that have been helpful?
I think learning how to create bite-sized content, I think is something that we're wrestling through, really trying to take moments from a message. This requires assigning this responsibility to somebody on your team. So I think somebody on your team should be thinking through bite-sized content. We all know that, you know, the 40-minute sermon is, I don't want to say it's a thing of the past because I think we'll always have a place, but the time, people's attention spans on YouTube are just getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So learning how to think about your outline even when you're preaching as signposts and as little moments. Masterclass is a good example of this. If you've ever watched one of the classes on Masterclass, all of their classes are segments. You know, it's like a little 3-minute segment on how do you pick out the right eggs for the breakfast that you're trying to make. And then the next section is, you know, how do you scramble versus how do you fry, whatever it may be. I think learning how to set that up on the front end makes it easier for people to edit so that you can serialize your content, think about your content in bite-sized little portions, to be able to export it during the week, to be able to use it in other ways.
Does it feel like you would never sit down and watch a 40-minute YouTube video, but you will watch 20
That's true.
5-minute
That's true.
YouTube videos?
That is really true. That is really true. And that's just the way the world's moving. And the thing that we all have to wrestle with is we can get mad at the world and go, well, it shouldn't be that way. People should be in church and they should listen to the 60-minute sermon. Or we can go, hey, the world is changing and we can either adapt and figure this out. And I really believe that all of this, it's an opportunity that God's given us, that the moment has never been greater for us to be able to reach people. But it is going to require us to have to think differently, that maybe 25-minute clips versus the 60-minute message is the direction that we ought to be thinking about. But I recognize that's going to change things, and that's difficult to do. But I think we got to be thinking in that way.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think that's shifting for sure.
Yeah, it is. Sure. It is. So the last segment that I would talk about is just how do we think about the talk? And I got ahead of myself there thinking about the outline, but I was just thinking about how do we create that outline? How do you build that talk in a way that connects with the people through the camera, but also connects with people in the audience? I think that's the place where we still have the most room to grow. And I mean, this is not false humility. This is genuine. We don't know what we're doing. I don't know that anybody does. We're still really trying to figure this out. But as we think through, how do we build the outline? How do you build a talk? How do you build it in a way that can
You're saying a talk has an outline and then it has a presentation. And it's like, I can look at your outline and tell you if the presentation is going to be good or not, but the outline needs to be something that we focus on before we even walk into that next
I think
phase.
so. Yeah, I think so. I think if we're going to think most holistically through the people in the room and the people behind the camera, I think we got to think about the way we're even structuring that talk as well.
What else are you learning?
Well, as we think about just how we put the talk together, I'm thinking more of the outline, like the thing that's written on the page that you're going, okay, this is what I want to say. So less about the presentation, more about the building of that talk. Thinking about our talk as we're trying to answer a question today, that feels very, it feels a little bit like clickbait.
Yeah, because the number 2 search engine in the world is YouTube.
Exactly. Thinking about a talk that it's answering a question, setting it up that way. Hey, today, what I want to do is I want to try to answer the question, what do I do if I don't feel any motivation in life? That would be a great question to try to answer today.
I feel emotionally
What's the answer?
It's deep.
I think crafting a talk that way, that you really begin with some, juicy question. I just think about those, those articles like, hey, what are the 3 things that every guy wants to know about the girl he's dating or whatever? I mean, those are the kinds of things that you see at the bottom of whatever article you're reading. I think we got to think about our sermons in that way, that we're even craft them in that way, that it's answering a real specific question that people may be asking. I think the way we teach the Bible, I think really matters. That, there's a couple of examples of this, but Ben Stewart, he's one of the pastors at Passion City Church, he's in DC. John Piper, I've seen do the same thing, where they will, it's almost like they're using old school transparencies, and on the screen, all you'll see are the words, the scripture, and they're underlining, they're squaring,
Oh, I love that.
It's great because I think we got to utilize moments like that more. That, hey, it's one of the things that I love about the way we've bumped into the plasma, that the plasma has really, I think it's enhanced the way we teach the Bible, because you can read the first 4 words of the verse and leave the second half empty. Or you can read the first 4 words and then you can fill it in with what you might think that the author was going to be saying here. But there's ways I think that we can interact with the scripture to be able to underline words, bold words right here in front of us, that I think brings it to life. And I think we got to be thinking about that as somebody who's either taking a picture of it in the audience or somebody who's going to pause it and go, I need to think through that. Again, those are not concrete ideas, but I think just more thoughts that I've been having about how we teach the Bible. And then thirdly, I think really thinking about how to incorporate more media into our talks. I think a lot of that is in the way you craft it and as you're thinking about it.
When you say media, what are you talking about?
Well, an example of this would be Mike Todd at Transformation Church. This was one of the most watched sermons in, I guess it was probably 2019, 2020, probably end of 2019. But he's a pastor, church in Tulsa, and they had been praying for this building, big arena in Tulsa, that they finally got the keys to it, and they finally had the opportunity to buy it. And the way he preached this message, it was so full of other media. It was a video that he had shot a couple of years ago. It was a letter that a journal entry that he had written to God that he's putting on the screen. It was even when he got to the moment that we got the keys, this song that has this big bass drop in the middle of it that he played came in as he's talking about it. It was just so engaging and interactive that it wasn't just the spoken word to people in the room sitting there listening. It was so much more. It was enhanced with all kinds of
senses, maybe.
Yeah, there were more senses to it for sure. And no one watches TV with just one screen. Everybody has multiple screens up. So I think learning how to use multiple screens. We tried a series that we did called Welcome the Wilderness, and tried to use this, we called it a video cube, but the floor was an LED panel. There was an LED panel here behind me, an LED panel here. And it's almost like I was walking through the desert. And it was our team that really figured out how to do that. But I think learning how to enhance what we're doing without distracting from what we're saying, but that would really enhance what we're saying through more media. I think we've got to figure that out as we think about how to build our talks, our sermons.
Man, that's great. So when you think about this idea of, wow, we've lived in this digital world, culture is shifting. We are now operating in a hybrid world where I have to talk to a physical audience and a digital audience. So I can't forget everything I just learned from the digital world, but I've got to operate both. So you're thinking, man, we got to know our audience. We got to know what they want, how to communicate to them. We've got to have some clear strategies of leveraging tactics and skillful hands to communicate to them. And then we've got to work on the whole idea of what is a talk and reframe that for this new context.
I think so.
Yeah.
The last thing I would say, Julian, is there's this little verse in it's in 2 John. I think it's 2 John only has one chapter. So whenever I say 2 John 1:12, it's a little redundant because there's only one chapter. But John writes to the people that he had just been with, and he says, "I write to you now with pen and ink, though I long to be with you face to face so that our joy may be complete." I think that's one of the things that I have been, it's been a little baffling in this season where I see pastors, that are getting back together face to face with people, and they say things like, every person that I've hugged has said, it's just not the same at home. And whenever I see that and read that, I'm like, well, of course it's not the same at home. I mean, nothing beats in person. That in his case, this is in the first century, and he's saying, I write to you now with pen and ink, though I long to be with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. So I love the concept of that he's saying, is it more complete to be with each other face to face? Of course it is. It will always be more complete. Me being able to put my hand on your shoulder and look at you face to face and read your body language and eye contact and context. Of course, this is more complete communication, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't write to each other in pen and ink, which in his case was the technology of the day. I mean, it was like the new, it wasn't new necessarily, but It was what he had. It was all he had to be able to get these words to you in a way that he wouldn't have been able to get them to you otherwise. And so for us, we had the same disruption with the radio. We had the same disruption with television. And now we have this disruption where, look at this guy walking down the street right here who he's about to bump into a pole because he's staring at his phone. Everybody's walking around like this. And I don't think the day where the phone is going back in the drawer is ever going to happen. I think it's here to stay. So I think not begrudging it, not being frustrated by it, but really utilizing it and seeing it as an opportunity and not arguing that it's more complete. Of course it's incomplete. It's incomplete to be communicating over FaceTime. But my parents have gotten to see our kids more because of FaceTime than they ever would have. In our case, our sports leagues over the last year, there were no fans allowed. And so they streamed all the games, which was way less complete because I didn't get to meet all the parents like I would have loved to. But the cool part is that all of our extended family who doesn't live in Atlanta got to watch our 9-year-old play basketball. I just think there's so many advantages to it that I think John was touching on that yeah, the pen and the ink, it's good. It's not sufficient, but it's good. And we should use it even though our joy is most complete when we're together face to face. So that's the way we're trying to think about this hybrid model more than anything else, is that they're both needed, they're both important, they both have their ways, and I think God's given us both to be able to reach the most amount of people.
Man, that's good. So my last question for you, Clay, is, so you've talked a lot about these principles and practices, and it's just a lot. So I think a lot of pastors are kind of like, wow, this is just, blowing my mind. There's so much to do. I'm leading a team and a church, and I'm not an HR director, but I've got to make those decisions. So now you're talking about all these communication, and there's digital, and there's iPhones and YouTube, and I don't even like YouTube. So like, what do I do? Like, what's one thing that I can walk away with tomorrow and actually begin to apply all of this that you're talking about in this new world? What's just one thing that I can begin to do tomorrow that would make a difference?
I think that line that you said, that leadership is lonely, it's amazing how those 3 little words can really mess with you so much. But I mean, that was, I am well aware that leadership is lonely, but it was great to hear that. It was great just to hear somebody acknowledge that. So I would say one of the best things you can do is just get some people around you that are trying to do the same thing. You're not alone, that there are other people trying to figure this out. And so maybe it's a band of brothers, a band of sisters who are trying to figure this out with you. Maybe it's in your city. It's one of the things that I love about the partner program is being able to provide that community to know that you don't have to do this alone. But I think that's one of the ways that God is going to use community most in the next few years, is by us sharpening each other to figure out how are we going to learn this. We've got to have some younger people around us that are thinking about this, because they're thinking about it in ways that we're not. They see it in ways that we're not. I'm 40 years old. I'm kind of at this interesting spot on the generation little chart where I grew up without the internet. I mean, which is wild to think about. I mean, I know you did too. But yet my class at Georgia Tech was the first class that was required to have a computer. So I also know what it's like to come into the world, at least come into adulthood with the world at your fingertips. And so I really stand at a really unique place. But there are people growing up that are just indigenous to technology. They just see it very different. They're going to see church different. They're going to see the preaching different. They're going to see communication differently. And to try to understand minds like that and help them see the way our preaching is working, I just think getting some people around us to have some feedback loops to know what is working, what's not working, and how can we get better at this, for the simple reason alone of knowing that, hey, I don't have to do this alone.
Man, thank you so much, Clay, for sharing.
Glad to do it.
What God is teaching you and your team, and just the humility that you bring. I know that you guys are doing some amazing things, and just your posture is just really encouraging. And
well, thank you.
A heart, man. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. For all you out there involved and engaged in trying to figure out how do we reach people who are far from God and remove obstacles that connect them to Jesus, thank you for what you're doing. We hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you again soon.